Welcome. It has just gone 7 p.m, non-daylight saving time, Wednesday the 19th of October, and you are watching episode 64 of Regional Wrap. Regional Wrap, providing an insight on the issues affecting regional Australia and giving a voice to regional residents. My name is Bill Bates, and joining me on this episode, Renewables, the scale of their swathe, is my guest, Ben Beattie. Ben is an electrical engineer with experience throughout the full life cycle of electricity generation and coal seam gas. His experience covers design, construction, commissioning, and operational phases of large industrial plants across the power and gas sectors. Ben is also a regular contributor to Spectator magazine and is the host of TheBaseload podcast on the Rumble platform. Welcome, Ben.
G'day, Bill. Thanks for having me.
Well, if we could just start with some of maybe your misspent youth and also your education background and your employment background before we get on to the topic itself.
Sure. Before, I'm living in Brisbane at the moment. Have been living and working out of Brisbane since the early 2000s. Before that, I graduated from good old James Cook University in Townsville, up near your area, Bill. Before that, I went to high school in Townsville, a couple of places. Before that, what was I doing then? Primary school most of the time, and that was most of my school and high school years spent in Townsville. But before that, my dad's a civil engineer, and he moved around quite a bit. So I spent some time in Western Australia, up in Derby, inland from Broome, on an irrigation project. Spent some time in Papua New Guinea. When I was quite small. Dad was building some roads and some other projects up there, and I've been around a little bit. So when I lived in Townsville, we didn't live in the city. We lived on a farm about 60 k's west, a small place near a small township called Woodstock, or Reed River, on the way to Charters Towers. So my parents, they're from the land as well. My mum likes to tell me she rode a horse to school. And I said I'd never tell anyone because I'd think she was too old. But anyway, here we are.
Well, riding a horse or walking would probably a good thing for kids these days, because most of them have door-to-door service.
It'd be a shock to the system, wouldn't it? My work history. I started off working for a company called Yokogawa, a global control systems and instrumentation company, and that got me into the power sector. I spent a few years there traveling around commissioning, and then I've worked on some more project work, some EPC stuff, and then into a consultancy. And the last 10 years I've been in the coal seam gas sector in the owner operator side, which has also been a shock to the system, but I think I'm finally getting used to it.
So basically in an industry that's feeding energy or potential energy to someone to utilize to make electricity or some other product. How did you get on to being being electrical engineer? You obviously got a good overview, but becoming a little bit focused on the transition that's going on now between fossil fuels, moving away from fossil fuels and going to renewables, and the fact that it's not a market-driven thing, it's actually a government strategy, and they're basically making the situation happen, and it's, for better or worse, it looks like it's going to cost the consumer a lot of dollars out of his pocket.
Yeah, so my skeptical origin story. To be honest, I knew about wind farms and solar farms. I've done a little bit of NER, National Electricity Rules compliance work on generator connections, and I knew they existed. And I think I even had solar panels on my own roof by then, taking advantage of the infamous 44-cent feed-in tariff from back in the day. But what awakened me, I guess, was a TV show. Now, I rarely watch the ABC, and I think it was Q&A. It might have been Insight, one of those sort of panel shows, and they had 4 or 5 panel guests on, and a guy in the audience asked a question And he said, so solar panels don't work at night. What are you going to do to power the place at night? And I thought to myself, half listening, that's a dumb question, but you got to ask a dumb question sometimes, and it's an obvious answer, which is obviously they don't work at night, and something else has to fill the gap. But the answer that started coming from the TV screen surprised me, and there was quite a bit of spin on it. And it was, I think it was Amanda Mackenzie of the Climate Council at the time. And I remember listening to it and going, why would you bother putting spin on it? It's a solar panel and it's nighttime. The two don't work together. They're mutually exclusive. So I thought to myself, So I looked at the Climate Council, and in my naivety, I thought it was a government organization, but it turns out to be a lobby group. And from there, once I scratched the surface, I couldn't get out. I was in deep. And then I realized that was about 2018. And since then I've been looking at it, going down the rabbit holes, I guess you could say, encountering the conspiracy theories and checking them out one by one. And I guess all you can do is ask questions and check the facts. One of the Spectator stories I wrote was based on that, which was people who work in industry, professionals, rely on facts and getting things right to survive in your job. If you're wrong all the time, you won't be very employable. So I wrote in my piece that professionals, they should just choose one item in the debate, just one, whether it's a climate question, say maybe sea level, or if it's a renewables question, and say, what's going to power the place at night, just something simple, and just follow it through to its inevitable conclusion and see what you find. And once you've found what you think is the facts, then check the source of the facts and where they came from, and just treat yourself to that and take your time and work it out. And that was basically what I did.
Just on the topic there, people, although you sort of got apprehensions about new renewals and that, but isn't it amazing the number of people who took advantage of that 44 cents? I mean, they still had to pay a fair bit out of the pocket in those days, even with the government subsidy. It probably would have cost, when that system around, it was still probably would have been about 10 grand out of your pocket. I think about 8 or 9 years ago, when we moved to Cairns, we got solar put on, and basically you could get a 5 kilowatt system for being five grand out of pocket. The rest was made up by the government scheme, whatever it was. But the thing is, a lot of people crow, I've never had a power bill, or my power bill's real low with having the solar. But a lot of people, who crow about it, seem to neglect that there's a lot of people, in rentals, that can't take that advantage and are paying the full 26, 27 cents per kilowatt. Then there's other households where they're in units or things like that, where you don't have your own roof space. And then there's other people who may have a house, a single dwelling, but it's not positioned ideally to take advantage. So while it's okay for some, there's a great portion of people actually can't be a beneficiary. And that's what I find that's so unfair about this system that we're going into. There's a lot of people who are paying for other people.
Absolutely. And that's kind of the way it has to happen, because if everyone was forced to pay full price for the solar panels, then hardly anyone would do it. And as a result, you get this wealth transfer. So you and I got our solar panels when they were quite expensive. I think I remember mine would have been more like 12,000. And that was quite a big hit. And I thought, well, the rebate makes it worth it. And the electricity bills are going to be a lot less down the track. And of course, that's all true. What I didn't understand at the time, and to be honest, I never even thought about it until I went down this path that we're on now, is that my neighbor who doesn't have the solar panels is subsidizing me for my bills, and the pensioner who's may not be able to afford the fuel for the car is also subsidizing my energy costs. On the flip side of that, if you have solar panels and you have quite a lot of them, then you're not as frugal with your power, right? So you're quite happy to use the air conditioner a bit more, all those kind of things. So it's a double whammy. So what you'll find is that if you're wealthy enough at the start to get the solar panels, get all the subsidies, get all the free benefits, your quality of life is actually quite a bit better because you can use more energy, you have more spare money, and it's more than just a money transfer, right? It's a quality of life transfer as well.
But the other thing is too, the only reason you went out and got the solar panels because electricity had gone up and up and up. But if these renewable targets and the focus to change over from fossil fuels had it never happened, we could still be getting power to our door between say 12 and 14 cents instead of say 27 cents, because if you look at the graph in regards to the separation of the normal consumer price index, electricity started separating and going much higher in about 2007 after Rudd and the interest in making renewable targets. And it kept this separation between the common CPI and the cost of electricity kept going further and further. The only time it flattened out is when Abbott came in for a couple of years and it actually flattened right off, but then Turnbull came back in and it started separating again. So you can see that the price of electricity actually is being driven by government policy, not by technology or any other reason.
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty correct. It certainly masks any more natural cycles in the price index with regards to energy, because energy, we're talking electricity, not energy. They're two different things. So your retail electricity price for your, let's talk about say residential as opposed to businesses and large business, is driven by a few factors, and those factors will ebb and flow over the years. So you've got your natural resources, so they'll change costs up and down. You've got your capacity, so whether you've got enough generation or not enough generation, and you've got your seasonal variations as well. So your hot summers, remember 2019 and rolling blackouts in Melbourne. So all that sort of thing comes into it, but it is whether the renewables policies are masking some of that, or if they're just exaggerating it in terms of volatility. And I think it's a little bit of both. I think there is some logic in the statement that wind and solar now being cheaper to build, it wasn't always the case, now being cheaper to build can have a lowering effect on wholesale prices. But the problem with that is that's only part of the story. They can offset, and we'll talk about the bid stack in a moment if you like. I've got some images ready to go to explain that. But wind and solar only lower the price when they're working, and you need so much infrastructure and other mechanisms to make them work. The transmission, the storage, the backup, all those things have to be on all the time. You don't get a break from those costs. So wind and solar, I can't see how anyone can say that after a certain portion of them, once you get above a certain threshold, the price of it has to go up, because all this other infrastructure required to make them work has to go up, and you pay for it not just at the capacity factor of the wind and solar, you pay for it 100% of the time.
The other thing is too is while people were sort of apathetic or not overly concerned with what was going in with the introduction of renewables, because it didn't really figure in their imagination. But now that we've gone to committed to 2050 net zero 2050, and it's starting to have an impact in regards to electricity prices just over the last year and the forecast. Do you think the public now will start paying much more attention to the gibberish that the politicians and the spruikers are putting over?
Yeah, definitely people will be paying more attention. And the risk is that the dogma and the rhetoric of the renewables and climate lobby is impenetrable at this stage. When they say newer generation, the cheapest new generation is the phrase you hear quite a lot. And there's quite a lot in that in that statement. I mean, cheapest, it might be cheapest to build, but is it the cheapest to operate in an integrated grid? Not so much. Is it cheaper than, say, to build a new wind farm of 1,000 megawatts, or is it cheaper to build a coal-fired power station of 1,000 megawatts? And I think you'll find they're not that much different in capital. The difference is in the fuel inputs over the years. So that's where you start having these nuanced, more educated discussions, which is what I'm hoping is that people find discussions like this and realize there's a lot more to the story than just cheapest new generation. One classic example is our Federal Energy Minister, Chris Bowen. He was interviewed on the 7:30 report quite recently, only a few days ago. And I think Sarah Ferguson was the interviewer, and she was hammering him about the higher prices. Jeff Dimery's statement from Alinta, where we're going to go up 35% on top of the 20% we've already gone up. And then there was obviously Albo's $275 saving claim, and we've already wiped that out. And so it's not looking very good for him. And Chris Bowen literally just kept saying, it's cheaper, it's cheaper, it's cheaper. And I just wish Sarah Ferguson had said, what evidence do you have to support that claim?
I think the other thing is too, I think we've been let down by the media. I mean, the media, if you go back in history, I think it was around about the French Revolution and that, when we had the power, what was called the power of the press, and sort of journalism at that early stage, and it was termed the fourth estate, and it was supposed to be there and hold all the other three estates, the church, the aristocracy, and the government system in check. But we've now got a media system which certainly doesn't operate in the fourth estate mode. It operates on.
Is it the fifth column?
Well, maybe it is, but it seems to align itself with the general discussion of the government of the day. It doesn't matter whether it's COVID or renewables or that, but it's certainly not a prying investigative do their own search and then ask the questions group of people. And I think maybe as more people become peeved with the continuous increase in prices, and the public turns on these sort of things, maybe then the press might do its actual job as the fourth estate and put some proper questions to these claims.
Yeah, definitely. One of the problems, and I feel sorry for the journos, because I often think it'd be much easier for an engineer like myself to become a journalist than it would be for a journalist to become an engineer and understand some of this stuff. Sorry, journos, if you're watching, no offense intended. But I'll share my screen here and I'll give you an example of why it is quite difficult for to explain this stuff. Can you see that?
It's coming up. Yep, there it is. A little bit slow.
So this is from a graph from the Australian Energy Market Commission. Now it's a kind of a fact sheet and explainer, and it is a little bit out of date, but this is the best example that I've found so far of explaining how this is meant to work, the wholesale price. So this is a bid stack. So you can see in delivering electricity, AEMO dispatches electricity every 5 minutes. And they physically send a megawatt, a set point, to each generator that's part of the scheme, and they match that number in their output. So they do it every 5 minutes, and then we're talking about settlement over 30 minutes, which is a bit that's changed, now 5 minutes. But the spot price for a trading interval is the average of these 6 prices, all generators dispatched in that trading interval receive the spot price. So this is an interesting sort of not an intuitive concept that a lot of people don't quite understand. When they see the spot price, they might think that just one generator is getting that price. But in reality, everything in that region exposed to that price receives that price. It's a clearing price. And that's used as the basis for contracts. And this is when they talk about, remember a couple of years ago, Angus Taylor was talking about trying to get the spot price, the average spot price down to $70 a megawatt hour. Well, this is what he was talking about. But to get there, to get to the clearing price in every 5-minute period, the market operator, AEMO, the Australian Energy Market Operator, they start off with the cheapest generation, and they fill a block of volume of megawatt hours. And once they've exhausted that cheapest amount of generators, they go to the next cheapest and the next cheapest. Or another way of saying is that they start with the cheapest and they end up with the most expensive required to meet the demand. So as you can see, as you start putting more expensive generators on, that price can go up quite quickly, and quite often this spot price can go up over $1,000. And in Queensland, the last few months, it's been averaging more like the 140 or the 200, and that's across the whole day. So you can see that far from Angus Taylor's hope that he'd get down to 70, which he did for a while there, we're in pretty dangerous territory now. So that's one of the reasons why I feel sorry for our journalists, because there's several components of our electricity system which are actually quite hard to explain, especially in a 30-second grab on the news one night.
The other thing too is it must have been so much simpler in the days when there was no intermittent generators and it was all just coal and gas and large suppliers, and just they'd all rotate their maintenance and all those things. It must have been a much simpler system of delivery and costing.
Yeah, and you can see by my backdrop, I chose that one deliberately for today. Which hand have I got up? That one there. So you can see the link between Queensland and New South Wales there. Yep. And the link between New South Wales and South Australia, and obviously a couple of links into Victoria and Tasmania. Now those prior to that's what we call the national electricity market, and it's not that national, right? It's the East Coast plus a bit. And that's the one. All this conversation revolves around this area. In reality, before we had this national electricity market, the states were all separate. There was separate regions within the states. Even even today, the Mount Isa region is not connected to the broader grid. So how do they control it? How do we control this stuff in the century before we got AEMO running the show? And it wasn't that hard. You had spinning generators. They have their control systems. Before we had electronic control systems, we had hydraulic, electromechanical control systems, and they all work quite well. They all had their drawbacks, of course, but it ran. And how did they set the price? Well, they were all government owned. There wasn't such a thing as a private generator, even as recent as the 80s, I don't think. So that's the big privatisation sweeps through Victoria, New South Wales, and Queensland hasn't had those yet. So that's a different discussion. But
yeah,
sorry.
Just on that note, I do remember I was in Victoria when the SEC was privatised along with the gas and fuel, and I understand in regards to why those things get pushed by governments, especially when you've got a union workforce that's, I think the gas and fuel was going to strike every winter, and the SEC strikes at Christmas. And they just seem to be a rotating system where the wage costs and everything keeps going up and up. And I suppose the governments just get sick of it and just want to be divorced of this industrial relations nightmare sort of thing. So I can see the incentive of the governments want to divest of it. But if we can just move on now that we have 2050 coming in, and we're going to, I think you mentioned there's probably about 30 installed small wind and solar farms in Queensland at the moment. But looking at the government list of planned ones, I think they've already got a total of 160 something projects altogether in the mill. And I think the total power for the renewables alone is, if all that comes online, is about 34 gigawatts of power when that sort of does come online. So 34 gigawatts of power, we use about 8 gigawatts peak demand in summer. So that seems to be a lot of gigawatts over it if all the windmills are turning and it's the middle of the day. So can you give us a sort of idea what scale we're going to have cut across Queensland? Because it's already starting to play out up here in far north Queensland. We had our first little test wind farm at Windy Hill, then we got Mount Emerald, and now we're getting Caban, and now we've also got Chilumban on the horizon with 95 wind turbines. So even the people who cheered these on in the initial part are getting a bit concerned about the scale of installation and projects just in local areas. So what do you think the sort of scale is that we will have to have? And we'll just keep the conversation probably to Queensland, just the scale of wind farms and solar farms to sort of get us somewhere to reliable baseload power with renewables and batteries.
Yeah, that's what everyone wants to know, I guess. What I can do is I can show you some of the estimates, and there's a couple of places where I can find them that have come out recently, and what they're expected to supply. We can talk about capacity factors and gaps in supply, and we can compare that with what we have now. So obviously at the moment, Queensland's meeting its electricity demand relatively easily. We have 8 coal-fired power stations. Some of them have a couple of issues, especially with fuel at the moment, getting fuel out of the mines with the water. And we have some gas peakers. We have a good sized hydro in Wivenhoe. That's a pumped hydro. So that's a very handy thing to have for various reasons. And we've got a few scattered smaller hydros and some gas peakers dotted around. So at the moment, we don't need to spend any money on the network, but we've got a whole lot of stuff going in. So I'll share my screen with you again, and we'll go through something which came out would have been a few weeks ago now, called the Net Zero Australia Plan. I love these things.
Net Zero Australia.
Yeah. So we've got this Net Zero Australia, and you can see the logos there. You got all the good ones. UQ, University of Melbourne, Princeton, even. Love a good love in with the academics. So we go to the page I had queued up before. Southeast Queensland. So 2020, obviously they've got Brisbane and Gold Coast sort of going on in their regional centres. And we're talking about, and yeah, it's got the disclaimer that's indicative only, but you've got wind and solar taking up, Gold Coast and sized regions of the hinterland there. So that's an interesting thing for people who live in that area. To have that much generation connected, you've got a significant transmission backbone as well. If we go down to come up to central Queensland, what do we got on there? Smaller load centre, largest regional. What would that be? Gladstone? I think that's Gladstone.
Gladstone.
So now we're talking 2060. Okay. But 2060 is chosen for this snapshot as it includes a major export energy zone, which is fully developed in 2060. So this is your hydrogen generation centre. This one looks like a parachute. Looks like someone's going to fall down and splat on the ground, which is an unfortunate thing. But this is, and again, if this is all solar PV, and in the red color, it's all solar with a bit of wind, you can see that that's a big area of land as well, and a correspondingly large amount of transmission to get it anywhere useful. And that's another thing with wind and solar, their energy density means, and where their resources are, the solar and the wind resources, means they require a lot of land, and you can't put it anywhere useful. You got to have it miles away.
I just bags it. I just reckon it should be put in Brisbane. They want it.
Yeah, well, West End maybe along the banks of the river there. That'd help. So you get a feel for some of the stuff that the academics are putting out, and I do wonder how much the politicians listen to this stuff. I mean, I listen to Chris Bowen as often as I can. Maybe doesn't help much with my state of mind.
You're some sort of masochist.
I must be. It's I feel it's my due diligence. I do have to listen and take what he says and check it and see what it means. What it means for me is that I'll be well employed in the gas sector for quite a few years yet. I'm pretty sure that electricity prices are going to be higher, especially in the near future, and in the distant future as well. Because remember, all this stuff has to be replaced in 20 years. You can't keep running a solar farm for 30 years or 50 years. It just doesn't work. Or a wind farm. I don't know where that factors into their calculations, but everyone knows that.
But I've also seen some graphs in regards to solar generation and wind generation around about the 16-year mark in both sectors of a solar panel and a wind turbine. The output starts to drop markedly after that 16 years. So really, although they're sort of saying, well, you can get 20 years or 25 years out of wind turbine or solar panel, the actual efficiency by the time you hit that 20 years is well down on its initial rating anyway. So it's getting to a stage where you'd have to make a conscious decision. Well, do you replace it earlier or that, or you just hope you can? There's enough other power around it to make up the difference.
Yeah, that's a good point. So that what you'll find is that that basically their capacity factor will drop away towards the end of their life, because it's not that they're not generating power at the same times or from the sun and the wind. It's just that you're getting less out of them at those times. When I had a look at this proposed Southern Star wind farm, it's meant to go in off Gippsland, and no doubt it will, despite the objections of the people who don't want to look at it, which you alluded to before. But when you look at that, and you go to the capex and the $4.5 billion, the $35 million a month, you can bet that if the developers know this roll off is going to happen, they know the lifetime of their plant pretty well by now. They've got enough of them running around the world. They know pretty much the hour when they're going to have it paid off at what subsidy. Therefore, they'll be angling for that. So I guess somewhere around that time they'll be looking to sell it off as well, which seems to happen fairly regularly. Someone develops a wind farm, and then within a few years it's owned by someone else.
But there's also this system where I've seen a lot of wind farms and solar farms, and even I think I don't know if you heard it, the Murchison hydrogen hub or whatever it was that sort of supposedly going over the west, and it has Australian creators or shelf companies coming up with the concept, getting the approvals, and then very shortly after they're taken over by someone like the Copenhagen infrastructure group or something like that, the Danish mob. So they seem to go and get all these approvals in the early stages as an Australian entity, and then sell it on to someone else. But the other thing I'm concerned about is if things change hands over a period of time and someone sells it, and they sell it to a $2 company, shelf company, which is quite possible. At the end of the day, and that shelf company is responsible for the demolition of all the it being taken down and decommissioned, and they haven't got $1 left, and they file for bankruptcy. Taxpayer again. That's also a possible scenario, and it has happened in the United States in regards to there are a number of wind farms around in the Midwest and also Hawaii that have just been abandoned, and really it's the counties, not the state government, but the counties that are actually have to foot the bill for their disposal.
Taxpayers on the hook. And there's some parallels there to the mining industry. I think there's quite a few old mines, and we're talking like pretty old ones, 100-year-old type things, which came into place before the rules around rehabilitation were tightened up. Now, if you're going to get a mine approved in anywhere in Queensland or Australia, you're going to have basically an escrow attached to it, where you're going to put money into it for rehabilitation over the life of that project, so that if you do go belly up, there is some money there to spend on rehabilitation. And you can see the department, whatever the Queensland Department of Energy and Water and something else, DEWS, they've been rehabilitating some mines and putting that across social media, and they look quite good. One of the things you mentioned about the rehabilitation and decommissioning of old wind farms, well, up your way, if you go to Ravenshoe in the next couple of years, you might see one being pulled down, the first one. It's due to be deregistered, I think, in 2023. I'd have to check that, but it's pretty close. So Windy Hill.
Yeah, I think that'd be Windy Hill, the first.
Yep. Yeah, and so that's also gone through that ownership history. I tried quite hard to find in the public record a decommissioning plan or even an environmental impact assessment or some kind associated with it, and I didn't find any of that. But what I did find, it was originally built by Stanwell and it was then sold on, and now I think Ratch from Thailand owns it. So whether they're obligated to do a cleanup on it, who knows. But if you do look up some of the more recent wind farms that are maybe some that aren't even built yet, you can find some environmental documents in the planning process through the various websites, and it's not that easy. You've got to be dedicated. When you do come across one, excuse me, you find that there's a pretty common paragraph, because most of these development applications are done by a set of specialist consultancies, and generally what you'll find in industry is that in some of these places they get someone who knows what they're doing, and they offer them some money and come and work for us. So what you'll find is a lot of these regs and standards and these boilerplate things are written by a core group of people who've just bounced around from company to company. So I've noticed that looking at a few of these environmental statements, that the section that talks about decommissioning and rehabilitation are all worded very similar across the projects that I've seen it. And basically it comes down to they'll remove the towers and the blades and maybe the transformer and switch room and rehabilitate that. But the 600 cubic meters of concrete and 100 tons of steel in every wind tower base, that stays there forever. And the underground cabling basically stays there forever as well. So, and then
not
there's a
if
little
it's
one
copper.
that says,
Someone's got to come and pitch that.
Unless the landowner wants it. Well, that's a good point, actually. So, well, to be fair, some of these cables could be aluminium as well, which is maybe as valuable as copper in the future. Who knows? I'll just bring up another share for you, if that's all right. This is, if I go to, is it this one? Yes. So this is one of Queensland's brochures about the super grid. You can see there, it's an infrastructure blueprint. Love it. Lots of good stuff in here. Plenty of photos, some graphs about solar farms, whatever. An explainer on pumped hydro. That's great. Thanks. We get a map, and you can see here that we're talking yellows, purples, greens, and blues. What do we got? Purples are pumped hydros. Pale blues are hydrogen. Dark blues are big pumped hydros, I guess. And the yellows and wind and greens are the solars and wind. So now you can see that in this sort of cartoonish arrangement, and the circles are not the physical size, right? They won't take up that much room, but there's quite a lot of them.
We just broke then, that's all.
When you take the existing locations of wind and solar and our coal plants, which are these black dots, and you've got a few orange dots, which are gas, and you've got a pumped hydro there, you can see that there's not much really going on in Queensland. It's enough. But if I bring that to the front, you can see that there's a lot more going on there now, particularly in the Surat and west of Dalby and Chinchilla there, and particularly up around Townsville, Bowen region, which I think is quite interesting.
Cairns gets its share too.
Cairns gets its share, that's right. So you can see that there's a lot going on, and like you alluded to before, if there's that much supply, but the demand's not, it's not there to supply the demand, what's it going to do?
Well,
you can't generate if there's no one taking the megawatts. It doesn't work that way. They've got to be balanced. They've got to be the same.
Well, that's the thing. If I'll just share a screen now, and then we'll move on to the sheer scale of renewables that are needed, but not all the time, but needed to guarantee baseload power, but well above the normal operating capacity. Now, these are the figures I've sort of gleaned out of the Keenan Institute out of the United States of America in regards to the amount of wind energy you need to create a reliable 1 gigawatt base load. Now, basing it on their figures, basically for every gigawatt of baseload power we've got, like a coal generator, we need to install about 4.5 gigawatts of wind turbines. And then we also need to install, to back it up, about 10 gigawatts hours of batteries or hydro. Now, that equates, right, for 1 gigawatt, you need 9 Cooper's Gap wind farms, right, which were $850 million. Cooper Gap cost $850 million, 123 turbines, output of 453 megawatts. Now, now 9 of those
sometimes
will get you a cost of $7.6 billion. And then if you want to back it up with equivalent Hornsdale batteries to 10 gigawatt hours, you only need a quick income of $13.5 billion to replace 1 gigawatt of baseload power. And it's even worse when you move to solar. So this is based on, again, to create 1 gigawatts of reliable wind farm power, solar power and battery backup based on the Yarran Lee solar farm. You need 45 of them that cost $200 million each. So that's $9 billion you need up front. And then also you need 122 Hornsdale power hubs to generate the 15 gigawatt hours of backup. And that's just a cool $20 billion. So if we're going to just replace our 8 gigawatts of peak in Queensland, which is our summertime peak, and we actually don't have coal anymore and we don't have gas anymore, that means we've got to have, something like 36 gigawatts of wind and solar power and also all the battery backup. That's a huge scale of materials to go in to make these things, and also land space. Like Cooper's Gap is 102 square kilometres. Now, if you need 9 of them for 1 gigawatts, that's 918 square kilometres. Multiplied that by 8, so that's the land you need to do it there. So do you think anyone's got any idea of the scale that we're letting ourselves into? A, just for the installation, and B, then for the materials that are actually needed to make all those things.
Well, to answer your first question, does anyone have any idea? Then yeah, that's not that far off what Palaszczuk's plans are. She's got another 12,000 megawatts of wind and 10,000 megawatts of large-scale solar, on top of rooftop solar, on top of ridiculous hydro plans. And you can see here 540,000 hectares and 40,000 hectares. So you're pretty close to 600,000 hectares there. What's that going to be? 6,000 square kilometers.
Yep.
and you got to link it all together, and you got to have roads and tracks, and you can't get what are wind turbine blades get up to these days? 120 meters, something like that.
No, the ones coming into Cairns, I think they're 185. The series coming into Caban now, 185. But the ones for Chilumban, because I think they're going to nearly a 5 megawatt turbine, they'll be approaching 200 meters. It's huge.
But don't
nothing
worry,
offshore.
Bill. Don't worry, Bill. It's only a small portion of Queensland's total area. That's I'm
not worried about the area. It's the cost.
Well, think about trying to transport anything that's 180 meters long into the scrub. Hey, and you're meant to put these things on hills as well. Yeah, I don't know. I think these plans are well and good, but I can't see it happening. I really can't. It's just not going to happen. The pumped hydro. I've had my dad still got some faculties. Sorry, Dad, if you're watching. he's checking it out for me in his civil engineering space. He understands a bit more about that than I do, and he says the dam itself, it looks like it, without worrying about cost or why or whatever, the location for the dam seems like a good spot for a dam. There's rainfall, it's got good borders and all the rest of it. So that's part of it. But the plans to get 5,000 megawatts of pumped hydro, oh dearie me, that's something else. The largest in the world, apparently. When I heard that, I looked it up, and obviously when you consult the Oracle, Google, you get the sub Oracle, Wikipedia, and that gives you the next nearest pumped hydro in the world. The largest in the world at the moment is 3,000 megawatts. So this is 150% bigger than that, and that's in Virginia in the US. When you do the calcs on it though, you get something different, because she did say that she would use that pumped hydro to generate half the state's electricity. Well, she said energy, but I'll forgive her for that. I'll assume she means electricity. When you take Queensland's total annual demand is about 60 terawatt hours, 60 million megawatt hours. Half of that is 30 million megawatt hours. If you want to, the way you work this out is you say, all right, what's that in a 24-hour period? And then you break it down to a 1-hour period. You say, okay, I'm going to need 82 gigawatts to 82 gigawatt hours, which is what, 30 million divided by 365. I should have brought my spreadsheet up and we could have worked through it in detail. But I got about 8,000 megawatts, not the 5,000 that she came up with, because if you use 5,000 megawatts, you have to generate for 16 hours a day. Now, that only leaves you 8 hours a day to pump, and pumping uses more power than you can generate. So you either need to have some extra pumps that you can bring online, more than your generators, and typically your pumped hydro, your turbines just spin in reverse to pump the water back uphill. So you don't have just a massive pump lying around. You do it that way. Therefore, you need to pump up through that 8-hour period. You can't get it. This is what I don't quite understand where she got her calcs from. I'm still trying to find that out. So when you look at it in that sense, a 5,000 megawatt pumped hydro is enormous. Wivenhoe, the big one in southeast Queensland here is two 260s, I think. So it's about 520, and that's a good size one. Snowy Hydro's total capacity is about 4,000 megawatts, 4,500. This is an incredible. These are incredible numbers. And every time you talk about renewables on scale, the numbers get even more incredible. Did you ever analyze Twiggy Forest's hydrogen claims? I did a couple of weeks. I did a couple before the ASX shut him down and said, "What are you talking about? Who's paying for all this?" And yeah, I mean, that's when you start talking about hydrogen, the numbers get even more ridiculous.
Well, you come from the regions, but I live here. I came from the city and moved to the regions. You've gone the other way, but it's amazing how local governments get hooked on spiel. Like, I mean, the people in Gladstone, local government were tripping over themselves to be photographed with Twiggy and things like that. And in Townsville, people are falling over themselves to be photographed with Edify Energy and anyone else in the energy hub. And it's really annoying in regards to, like, now Palaszczuk's talking about this hydro scheme, but how long have people in the regions been bitching about, hey, build some dams for water, A, one, for our guarantee our water security, and B, for irrigation, and never going to get a Guernsey, yet no worries. Renewables, pumped hydro, we'll throw 12 billion at that, as a baseline, and it'll probably go up to 20 billion, but we can't find 2 billion to raise the wall of the Beattie Dam that will guarantee, improve the storage by more than double, So it really gets up my craw in regards to how one thing gets a Guernsey, but things that can generate wealth, right, and create more jobs and things like that, don't get a run, but things that are actually going to destroy our wealth, everyone's falling over themselves.
That's an excellent point. You're right about the dams. I mean, the pumped hydro is there. The first thing I said to my dad is, well, who's going to get priority for the water? And this is before I realized that it's only there for electricity generation. It's normally a dam, you have drinking water or irrigation, industrial users, or you have some hydro associated with it. In those instances, who gets priority in a drought? And this is one of the questions I put to the deputy energy minister, Lance. Is it Lance McCallum, Queensland guy? No, there was like a info session on hydrogen a few weeks ago here in Brizzy, and I asked him, with this hydrogen work that's going on around Gladstone, this is huge hydrogen spend. They're going to do a couple of $2 billion on that. I asked him who's going to get the priority for the water that the hydrogen is going to consume, and he said, they work it out. So I don't know if that's news to the people there.
It's called a boxing ring. You get in it, and the one who comes out gets the prize.
It looks like you could throw a punch, I reckon. I don't know. We'll have to see. I don't know if you'd have to get in the ring these days. But you're right about the value adding. Wind and solar, as you mentioned earlier, predominantly foreign owned. Not that they're basically a parasite on the system. They take a lot of money out, and they push up the costs. You could argue that as the renewables and climate lobby do, that the renewables have a lot of jobs in construction. Well, they do and they don't. They have, if you look at solar farms, remember a couple of years ago when the ETU in Queensland kicked up a stink and said, we want electricians to do all the work. I don't know how electricians would feel about carrying a battery drill and a bag full of tech screws all day, but that's, from what I understand, they're put together by backpackers who do spend money in the region and all the rest of it. But that's another thing. And I think also, I don't know if you've noticed this. Someone told me this. A colleague told me this a while back. There's a working visa extension you can get in Australia, normally for farm workers. But apparently the solar farms have got in on that one too. So you can get.
Well, there's still farms, the wind farms and solar farms. So farm workers.
that might be it. That might be the link. But they are parasites on the economy. I sincerely believe that if you have if you have a coal-fired power station, you've got a mine associated with it. You've got associated industries that support it. You need boilermakers and welders. You need those shutdowns every couple of years. You need the big shutdowns every 5 years or so. And a lot of that labor is local. A lot of those skills are local. If you listen to a guy called Chris Kiefer on Podcasting World, he's a big nuclear advocate from Canada, and he talks about generational jobs in the nuclear industry because the plants, they're around for so long. You know, the dad gets a job there, he works there for 30 years, the kid gets a job there, then they both work there. And it goes on like that. With wind and solar, you're not going to see any of that. Like Matt Canavan famously said, you don't see any car parks at a solar farm.
The other thing is too, is all the capital equipment is basically coming from overseas. So our dollars are flowing out. And then the other scary part is with the short life cycle of 20 years, it'd be like the Sydney Harbour Bridge. You know, they start painting one end and they get to the other end and it's time to go back and start painting again. So it's got to be the same way with solar and wind farms. They get through and they put in all the wind farms to get the required megawatts and that. Then they go back and decommission and start reinstalling. But all that money and all that capital cost every 20 years is going out of the country. There is nothing for us. There's nothing for, and our national security and energy security is going to be completely dependent on the whim of some overseas manufacturers and suppliers. And at the moment, with the situation in Europe and that, it looks like their renewable industry is under threat, manufacturing, because of the price of electricity. And they're talking about sending electric cars that they were going to build in Britain to China. The solar panels that they were going to make in Germany look like they might not be able to do it. They'll come from China. So we're going to be dependent on a hostile nation, or could be a hostile nation in the future, for just turning our lights on. Yeah,
absolutely. The other problem is if they do spend so much money forcing this hydrogen industry into existence, well, we're basically going to be covering our landscape with wind and solar for the express purpose of exporting our drinking water overseas, because that's basically what hydrogen is, right?
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand that for every kilogram of hydrogen you make, you have to blow up basically 9 litres of water, and that water will be regenerated in Japan, where they put it in the furnace or whatever they do with their hydrogen over there. But they do talk about green energy and the green hydrogen, where you have a D-cell plant. Well, D-cell plants are energy intensive, so you have to build thousands and thousands of hectares of wind farms to make your D-cell plant run. Then you've got to run thousands and thousands of hectares of wind farms to do your hydrogen, and then it just goes on and on.
It's diminishing returns. And what about this crazy plans to cover half the Northern Territory in solar panels? I think that's something like 10,000 square kilometers. It's like 100 kilometers by 100 kilometers. Take a hectare and just make it, a couple of factors larger.
That's Cannon Brooks.
It is, it is. And the idea is that we'll destroy our natural environment to supply Singapore with electricity for 6 hours a day.
Only a small percentage of electricity. But isn't it amazing how the media, fawns over this guy when he spills? And the worst thing is now he's got so much money from his tech inventions that he's now corrupting the electricity system by being a major shareholder in AGL and things like that. That's not a good situation for a country to be in, where someone who has a particular bent is getting into your core businesses that run the country and changing the shape of it.
There's a national interest argument there for sure. What Cannon Brooks's plans are for AGL is made pretty clear, which is to shut down their coal-fired power generators. That'd be Liddell and Bayswater in New South Wales. So there's about 3,500 megawatts and another 1,000 megawatts in Victoria at Loy Yang. But I still, for the life of me, can't work out the economics behind this, because all those plants are raking in money. And I don't know how AGL are going to replace the load for their customers. The supply, how they're going to make electricity for their customers and meet their contracts if they don't have these terawatt hours of generation coming in from their baseload power stations.
If we could just move on to materials and that, the bill of materials for wind and solar farms is quite extensive in regards to the metal requirements and the mineral requirements and the processing that. There was a article not so long ago in Belgium by some professor in regards to, he was working out that if the whole world does move to supposedly get to net zero and they all adopt this stuff, we'll get to about 50% of the requirements, and we'll just run out of some materials because there's just not enough reserves in the world. And as time goes by, not only that, as they get less and less reserves, they become more expensive, and that usually also they're in areas where it's harder to get, so there's more overburden and things like this, so it becomes a major task. So can we look at sort of, well, what are we up for in regards to materials? I mean, Australia is fairly well positioned in the old technology. We've got plenty of coal, but there's a lot of people saying, oh, we're right for the future because we've got all these rare metals and that, but they're not that easy to mine, and they're not that easy to process.
Oh, you could ask that Indian bloke Adani what it's like trying to get a mine up and underway in Australia. I've got some. The info that I was going to share with you on this is from the International Energy Agency, and this is a report from updated in March this year. So you can see they've taken in decade steps across the bottom. 2020, we're at this, whatever this number is, but by 2040, if the world goes what keeps trying to go this way, you'll need double the materials. And if you go with the more extreme version, you'll need quadruple the materials. Now, one back of the envelope calculation that I heard from somebody, I don't know if it's true or not, it might just be one of those perpetuating a rumor, but if the world wants to go to 100% renewables, which includes transport and power generation and all the rest of it, and green steel, etc., you'd need to mine in the next by 2050, you'd need to mine more copper in those 30 years than humanity ever has ever before. So that's one of those interesting double takes. You think, is that true or not? And yeah, it may well be. A friend of mine is into the coking coal business, so he knows a little bit about steel production, and he talks about green steel. It's there's no way it'll ever get off the ground without a lot of taxpayers' money. But to get green steel off the ground, you need hydrogen. To get hydrogen, you need all this wind and solar. And when you look into the details behind these plans, it all kind of rests on that, because you can't decarbonize, you can't get net zero without getting rid of coal. And whereas a lot of the coal used, it's in making steel. So how do you make steel without coal? Well, you need hydrogen. So how do you make hydrogen? Well, you make it from natural gas, you make it from coal, you can also make it from water. So if you make it from water, it's not called green unless you use wind and solar. The climate and renewables market have cornered that. The lobby groups have cornered that market pretty well. So unless you're in that sort of spectrum of the rainbow that gives you green tinges, then you can't make this stuff and call it green. So you need all this production and all this extra generation, incredibly wasteful, incredibly energy intensive, incredibly mining intensive, incredibly bad for the environment, just to get net zero. And this is why it's so dangerous in my mind. I don't trust it at all.
But the other thing is, people also got to realise, and you hit the word in that's there all the time. subsidies, taxpayer subsidies. So we're getting it on. We're going to get these costs on two fronts: A is the taxpayer subsidising, and B is the consumer paying the higher prices. When you've got those two factors, well, then there's going to be less money for education, old age care, less money for health, other infrastructure like roads and dams for irrigation. When do you think this is all going to sort of come together, and in 5 years or 10 years, and the reality is going to hit home? Or do you think they're just going to keep blasting their way through and just ignore? Well, our government seems to be ignoring what's happened in Europe over the last 12 months. What's going to be the thing that actually wakes everything up? The fact that we go to blackouts, is that what needed to get these people to tune into reality?
Yeah, I'm asked this question a lot, and I try and tackle it in a couple of ways. I don't think we'll get immediate big blackouts. There is enough generation and system at this point in time to prevent that, barring some out of the box problem like they had in South Australia in 2016. There is a couple of cases where lack of generation has caused blackouts. There was a good one in Victoria, in Melbourne, on Australia Day 2019, and even the then CEO of the market operator had to admit that the wind fell more than they thought it would, and therefore they had to shut off some suburbs of Melbourne for a couple of hours. As far as when is the general public going to realise that it's not going to work? And that's kind of what the question is. And then you've got to sort of step back and go, well, what does failure look like? I would argue that failure looks like now. If you know enough about it, we've failed. We're failing badly, and we're going to spend a lot more money failing. But when will that trend through? Have we hit the nadir? Are we going to come back and come up the other side? I think New South Wales 2024 is going to be really interesting. So you'll have, first of all, do you think the LNP will get back in the state government in New South Wales next year?
No, because I think there's no different. My opinion is, with the LNP or Liberals and Nationals now, there's no difference. They're singing from the same song sheet as Labor and the Greens in regards to this. People like, and I don't know how people like Canavan, Pitt, Colin Boyce, Wilcox is a new replacement for O'Dowd, who left, Barnaby Joyce, and a few others. I don't know how they can actually sit there straight-faced in the same party, that's basically, done the dirty on, as far as I'm concerned, on regional Queensland and regional Australia by going down this road, and then you have people like Littleproud, who became the LNP Nationals leader. He gets up there on Friday or something last week and carrying on about methane in agriculture. Yet it's like, this is all new to him, but he was the guy who signed the Nationals over to 2050 net zero, and now that they're talking about cow fart charges, taxes, and that, he comes out with a great surprise and astonishment, and give us a break.
I think you're pretty right. I don't think the Libs have got a chance in hell, but at the moment, I think the election will come before the real energy stuff starts hitting New South Wales. I think the ALP will just trot out the Barilaro stuff and the Gladys stuff, and that'll be all over Red Rover. They'll probably trot out Matt Keane as well. I don't think he's much of a selling point. Anyway, with ALP in government next year, Liddell will close, and it's meant to be guaranteed to close. And remember, it's an AGL facility. They've got closed a plant. They've announced it years ago. They've been gradually shutting it down. There's 3 units left, but it's still pumping out 1,000 megawatts pretty much most of the evenings. So what does that mean in New South Wales? Can they actually turn it off? So this is going to be the first test, I believe, for an incoming government. Even if the LNP scrape in, how will it look if they can't turn it off? I mean, Mike Cannon-Brooks might have a tantrum. I love to see how that goes. But
will they sell it
to can capture it.
But will they sell it for $1 to someone to keep there, who will make a fortune out of it, bring it online at sometimes? Because I think there's another plant that's someone picked up for a song, and they're making a killing out of it.
Yeah, Travis and Baker, even here's what you're referring to with Bales Point. He made an offer for Liddell back in the day when Malcolm Turnbull was the Prime Minister, and Andy Vasey, who now works for Mike Cannon-Brooks, said no. I think Andy Vasey works for Mike Cannon-Brooks. I might be wrong there. I'll have to check that.
But the other thing is too, Victoria is going the same way. They're looking at actually shutting down, in reasonably short time, 4 gigawatts.
Yeah. So what does failure look like? I think New South Wales is on the verge of finding out. So let's assume Liddell closes. They're down 1,000 megawatts. Snowy Hydro is late to the party, Snowy 2. And Energy Connect from South Australia is late as well, the transmission line. I think that's a blessing in disguise for New South Wales. And then you're on this situation where, when you said, would AGL sell it? No, because as soon as they close it, power prices go up and they make a lot of money. Right? Yep. So you've always got to remember that as soon as something closes, the prices go up because you've got generation scarcity. And what's going to fill the gap? Okay, so you've got a little bit of spare capacity in the coal generators, not much in Bayswater because that's been running pretty full. You got Vales Point, Mount Piper and Araring, but they all have, New South Wales is the interesting situation because all their generators are exposed to export coal prices. They've got limitations on their fuel handling on the conveyor belts, basically running through the state, sending the coal around the place and the trains. So sometimes those big coal generators can't get the fuel. And sometimes that's why they offer their price at very, very high prices, because they're saying, please don't use me unless you really, really need me. And if you really, really need me, you're going to pay for it. And that's how the market works. That's how it should work, and that's fine. But in New South Wales's case, with Liddell turning off, those other generators will be generating more. Those baseload power generators, they'll need to fill that gap. Now, sometimes won't be able to fill the gap. So what else will fill the gap? Gas and hydro. Now, not many people picked up on this, but I was listening to a Renew Economy podcast as well for my faults, and it had Frank Calabria from Origin on it. And he was asked what he's going to do when he shuts Araring, which is the next big one to close. And he said, well, we'll just fill in the gaps with gas for days and weeks. Gas for days and weeks. Now, that sounds like gas baseload to me, and I don't think it sounds very cheap at all. So what I think you're going to find is that the other states' prices will ride through this transient that we have at the moment, which is exacerbated by, there are some cold snaps. You've obviously got Russian coal and gas is off the market, mostly in Western civilization. So they're buying it elsewhere, which pushes the price up. And then you have some flooded mines with New South Wales and Queensland over the last 12 months. That's also pushed the prices up for the generators. But Queensland and Victoria will settle down. That's the natural cycle of things. Those things fade away, and those mines come back online. Those coal generators get back up. Boom, we'll be back to like $70 a megawatt hour before you know it. New South Wales, not so much. I'm afraid to say it's going to be terrible down there. They're going to be, and you can see this in the futures, on the AER. If you look at the futures, even by 2026, New South Wales is still up around the $120 a megawatt hour, while the other states are around the sort of 60 to 80. So New South Wales are going to be in big trouble. So the plan for Araring is shut down. So this is the big one for me. Liddell will go, and the prices will basically stay where they are at the moment, maybe a bit higher, but they'll stay there for a long time. They'll stay there through the election. The incoming Labor government oil predictions will then be able to turn around and say it's all their fault. You hear Chris Bowen say it all the time. 10 years of denial, 10 years of inaction. That old line will come out again, despite Australia being the highest penetration of renewables and all the rest of it. Good. Oh man, they love their tropes. But so in 2024 and 2025, when Frank Calabria is talking about shutting down Eraring, which is 2,800 megawatts of baseload, if it can get enough fuel, well, what's going to happen then? Well, I suggest that you already have a model for what's going to happen then from Victoria, because the Labor government in Victoria is already paying your lawn to stay online. Energy Australia. So they, a Hong Kong conglomerate, so they wanted to shut down your lawn, and the Victorian government said, no, can't shut it down. Well, we won't have any power. The price will probably go up. It'll be terrible for our election. Here's some money for 10 years. And that, I think, is exactly what will happen in New South Wales. I think they'll pay either Liddell to stay open if it's extreme, or they'll pay Eraring to stay open. And that there needs to be highlighted by the journalists. The journalists need to be asking these questions and saying, are you going to do what Victoria did and pay and subsidise coal? Because then you have the awesome situation, and I say that sarcastically or ironically. I can't tell what they are anymore. It's all the same to me. It's all bad. You're subsidising wind and solar everywhere. You're subsidising transmission, and you're also subsidising the coal generators to stay online. I mean, what could be better than that?
Yeah, and all these subsidies have been taken away. Like I say, the government's taken taken this course that's going to require money to come out of education, aged care, health, and everything else, and not be able to provide service to actually pay these foreign operators and rent seekers all this money for something we never needed in the first place.
Nah, Bill, you're thinking too small. They'll find that money and more. That the spending will go up, NDIS will go up, everything will go up. It'll go into the debt, mate. It's the debt. That's where it goes. The debt doesn't mean anything anymore to these people. So Queensland state debt's 124 billion, according to the Queensland Auditor's Office in 2021. Now we're going to spend 60 or 70 billion dollars in the next few years, plus the Olympics, plus the bloody Cross River Rail, plus whatever else they want to do. There'll be some rail project or something going on. There'll be another few billion. All that goes on to debt.
Well, it's
free money. It's free money.
That debt comes home to roost somewhere along the line, and
that's right.
Maybe it's not going to be this generation, maybe the next generation, but it's going to come home to roost somewhere. And it's a really fearful situation. And out of all this, there is nothing wealth creating out of these projects. There is not $1 of wealth. There's not $1 of reindustrialization of the nation. And if they can't take any notice of what's happened in Europe and especially Germany and Britain, there is not going to be any businesses in business to employ people and pay taxes, because they will never be able to afford the electricity. I don't know how they've got all these people supposed to be gurus, bureaucrats and things like that, providing all the scenarios. But gee, obviously, there's a scenario of falling in a deep black hole isn't amongst them.
You should listen to there's an interview floating around with Paul Broad on ABC Radio. It's a ripper. You should have a listen to that. Apparently he met Chris Bowen for the first time, and then he was out the door. I think he told Mr. Bowen a few certain truths, but he was the CEO of Snowy Hydro. I don't know, his salary is probably in the order of $1 or $2 million a year. Pretty highly paid bureaucrat, pretty experienced bloke, and by the sounds of him, a pretty good operator. He was scathing. Oh man, it was really good. I enjoyed it, because I don't have much faith in the bureaucrats.
You'll have to send me a link.
Yeah, it's great. It was epic. He just said the bureaucrats are wrong. They're all wrong. And anyone who does get interviewed in these areas seems to, whether they say it exact as openly as that or they dance around a little bit, the meaning is not that far beneath the surface. So a couple of years ago, you might remember the CEO of Stanwell in Queensland. He was at I think it was a Gladstone or a Rocky industry meeting, And in the room, he said, yeah, they're going to have to meet this. And back then it was only the 50% renewable energy target in Queensland, not this other stupid thing we've got now. But he told the room that to meet that, Queensland would have to mothball half its coal-fired generators, which is the absolute truth. And he was out of a job 2 days later. You should get him on the show.
Oh, anyone you want to push my way, I reckon it's a good interview. I'm fine with that.
Him, and then you get people like Jeff Dimery, who even this week has been quoted as saying it's all going pear-shaped. So it comes back to that question: is what does failure look like? And I think the failure is not a sharp point. The failure could be a flat bottom, and we're in it for a long time. I think that's where we're at.
Okay then, Ben. Look, we've gone well and truly over the hour. I'd like to thank you very much for coming on tonight. I think we've probably got another specialist show in this conversation for later on. But yes, I really do appreciate your time. And if you can just stay on the line, we'll have a little bit of chat. But I'll just introduce next week's show.
Thanks, Bill. I enjoyed it.
If you enjoy the show, please like and share on Facebook and subscribe. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel. Next week's guest is Dr. Robin Beadman. Now, the 26th of October is the second anniversary of the discovery of a mountain reef off the coast of Queensland. And Robin was the team leader for that expedition. And we'll be talking to him in regards to what's happened since, what's going on the reef. And the other important piece of news is what name are they going to give that reef? It's been in discussion for nearly 2 years. And we'll also find out how the process of going through and determining a name is actually made, because it seems to be a lot of debate and a lot of authorities that come into mix for just something as simple as naming a reef. So join me again next week. Thank you.